Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. This is day 2 of recording live at Black Hat 2019. We are at the suite at Mandalay Bay, and joining me for this interview segment is Dan Cornell, the founder and chief technology officer for Denim Group. Welcome.
No, thank you.
So I love this topic, injecting sec into DevSecOps.
Right.
A lot of people talk about DevSecOps, but I think very few really understand what it's going to take to make DevSecOps work. And the way I've always framed the issue, and we'll get into this discussion quickly, is on one side you have DevOps looking for speed and agility, and on the other side you're looking for security to understand, is the app secure and compliant, right? And those two don't always mesh well when you think about bringing the speed and agility of what DevOps is trying to do with kind of our old processes of security.
Right.
So let's start there a little bit and start talking a little bit about some of the challenges you see when it comes to security in DevOps.
All right. And so the way that we look at it is even taking a step back from that to ask, how have we gotten to this point? You know, why are we doing DevOps? Why do we need DevSecOps? And it's a bit of a overused marketing term, but a lot of it comes down to what we see in organizations is this push for so-called digital transformation. And what does that mean? It means we need to be able to quickly in an agile manner react to business conditions. We need to be able to move faster and innovate more than we were before. And so you look at organizations that are successful at this, and that's really required to stay afloat. Organizations that fail to do this, it's an existential risk, right? So security people have, in a lot of cases, a somewhat narrow view of risk. We don't want breaches. We don't want confidentiality, integrity, availability. From an executive level, it's a question of availability of the business.
Right.
I mean, ask
it's
Kodak.
Revenue, yeah, right.
Ask Kodak how their digital transformation initiative went, and there's nobody to answer that because it didn't go well.
Right.
And so what we see at the executive level is this push, and we've got to move faster, we've got to be innovative, we've got to be responsive. That then gets pushed to the technology teams. We're going to make this cultural change to DevOps, and that's, I think, an important thing to understand is DevOps is at its heart a cultural change of we're going to break down the barriers between the development teams, the operations teams, so we can iterate faster. That then pulls in a lot of technologies, cloud, containers, serverless, all these new
Kubernetes, all kinds of stuff.
All that stuff, because that's at a technological level what's required to be able to cycle quickly. And we also see adoption of new techniques like continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD pipelines.
Right.
The security people, a lot of the more traditional security people that are watching this are like, "What the hell is going on? Like, what are you doing to me?"
If they even see it coming. See, that's part of the other challenge.
And I think that's a great point. And for the smarter, the leading security people, they see this and they can read the tea leaves and see this is where the organization's going. They're going to be doing a lot of things that are super uncomfortable for me because I'm used to my annual pen test, my quarterly code review, whatever the template.
My monthly vulnerability scan.
Exactly right. And the more traditional security curmudgeon that's like whenever anybody comes and says, well, this is what we want to do, it's like, well, fill out this form. No, you can't do that, right? Those folks are getting marginalized. Because at the C level, they're saying we need to go this way because if we don't, business isn't going to be around. So I don't care if we're PCI compliant if we're laying people off and shutting the deal down.
Yeah.
The smarter security folks are looking at this and saying, we see where this is going. Let's, from a security practice standpoint, let's skate to where the puck is going.
Yeah.
And let's find a way to use this transformation that's going to happen whether I want it to or not. Let's find a way to use this transformation to accomplish the goals that we have, which are, again, confidentiality, integrity, availability, compliance, and so on and so forth.
Right. So I think what needs to happen, I want to get your take on this, is we need to start thinking about integrating security capabilities earlier in the DevOps pipeline.
Right.
Basically, right from the time of code check-in, and have to integrate a set of tools. I don't think it's one. I think there's various tools that come along in that chain that allow you to pass certain gates in a more automated fashion to do that base validation of security and compliance. So from your perspective, where do you see those different tie-in points? Because I think that's what everybody really wants to understand is where are those points in the process that I should be tying into security and what kind of tools should I be looking at?
Right. And so everybody wants to shift left. Also a term that's been
Yeah.
just like savagely beaten beyond anything that it ever deserved. But that's the idea. Like, how do we get security meshed in with what we're doing, move it earlier in the process so that we, at the end of things, we're not doing security as the last thing. Because, again, in a continuous world, there isn't an end of things, right? It's not like, okay, we've got our quarterly deployment coming up.
Because if you did that, you would be doing it multiple times a day.
Exactly.
Right? Because of the release cycles are potentially multiple times a day now.
And also what we see with the new technologies, cloud, serverless, all those things, that makes everything much harder. It makes things easier for developers. It gives them a lot of options.
Right.
From a security standpoint, it's a nightmare.
Yep.
We didn't solve, as an industry, we didn't have a good handle on application security when we were looking at monolithic line of business apps.
Right. Single language monolithic apps that went through a waterfall process. We did a horrible job protecting those. Now we break these things up into mini pieces, right? Distribute them in various places, multi-cloud and hybrid, and on-prem, etc. And they're multi-language. Yeah, we made it really more complex.
It's a clown show it's a nightmare for a lot of security folks. And and it's interesting because there's a lot of talk in the industry, especially in the federal space, but in general, about like the software bill of materials, right? And that makes a lot of sense for these monolithic applications. Okay, for this application, what open source do we have in there? What are the different pieces? But when you look at these modern applications, like really you've got to have an architectural bill of materials. And a lot of that starts with a threat model to understand what are the pieces of the system, how are they talking to one another, and for each of these pieces of the system, what are the things that roll up into that? And the way that we look at it, and this is evolving, but is for each of these chunks, you've got, I call it the 4 C's, for lack of a better anything, but you look at, you've got code that you wrote, right? So this is a custom logic that you're doing that's doing something valuable. That then pulls in different components, open source components that are doing frameworks and are doing different commodity tasks. That then sits on some type of compute, whether those are fixed servers, which are going away but not as fast as anybody thought, whether those are virtual machines, whether those are cloud servers, or if they're containers or serverless, right? But there's something that is executing all of this stuff. And then all of that lives in a cloud environment where you're concerned about the configuration. And so are my S3 buckets
configured correctly, so I'm not leaking data.
Right. What are my IAM permissions between these chunks in AWS and whatnot? And so when you take a step back and look at, like, here's all the stuff that rolls into this particular application, the different services and whatnot, then you look at a CI/CD pipeline, and the question is, how can we provide insight earlier in the process with that? And again, so you have things that will scan code, static, dynamic, IAST. You've got the software composition analysis that lets you look at components. You've got your network and infrastructure scanning that looks at compute, as well as some understanding of the container vulnerabilities. And you've got cloud configuration that you can check to look for known misconfigurations. And so there's a lot of data sources that you have, that you can potentially check very frequently, on each check-in. The question is, what do you do with this information? Everybody, I think, in a perfect world, security would love to be able to stop the pipeline, right? Like the Toyota assembly line, like, oh, this part's not right. Like, I'm going to pull the thing, and everybody's, let's fix this problem before it goes on down the line. From a pragmatic standpoint, from just looking at the politics in an organization, security folks got to be real careful about when and how they do that. Because
the business is going to move forward.
Exactly.
And it better be the right decision, because if you slow down the business, they're not going to let you come back the next time.
Exactly, right? Like, everybody gets one, right? and that's what we see with a lot of technologies, web application firewalls. Well, let's put it in blocking mode. Well, let's stop this transaction. Okay, well, let's just put it in listen mode. And we'll look at the logs. Never.
Right. The same thing with IDS and IPS.
Exactly.
We never put them in blocking mode.
Exactly, right? So it's just like, hey, we're watching this stuff go through. Bad stuff, guys. Is anybody listening?
Alert,
no.
alert. Somebody over there in the SOC handling that?
Anybody? And so that's something that I think security folks need to be cognizant of, is they have a role to inform the development teams of problems, and if they can do that earlier in the process, that's tremendously valuable. To look at blocking, you've got to be very judicious about when you use that power. With the Spider-Man, great power comes with great responsibility, and for security people with great power comes don't mess up or else you're not going to have great power anymore.
Right.
And so that's, I think, important for when we work with security teams in looking at this, like, okay, you want to provide information early, but be very careful about when you want to step in and stop the process.
Right.
And I think it's also important to realize that when you're running these tools or different tools or different scanning in a CI/CD pipeline, that's not the sum total of your security program. That's something that you're doing, again, to provide.
That's just the application piece of the pie, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because there's more to it than that. That you still have data security in there. You still have at least identity and user requirements at a bare minimum. And then it depends on where you're running. You may have more. But yeah, that's just the application component.
Exactly. And if you look at the type of testing that you can get into a pipeline, you have to provide results that are available quickly. What we hear in some environments is security has an 8 to 12 minute time budget of this is what you get to weigh in, right? And that varies in different environments. But it's important, I think, for security to look at testing in a pipeline. What's your time budget? They also have to provide results that are of high value to the dev team. Right. So is the developer going to look at this and say, "Oh, I'm glad I know about this now. Let me fix that before we move on down the road."
Do I have a malicious component that I pulled down from my Git repository? Oh, there's a newer version that resolves that vulnerability. It's an easy swap out. Done.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Versus, well, you've got XYZ. This is a medium. Like maybe you're worried. Like we'll sort that out. Like we'll sort that out in bulk or in a batch later. And they also, this goes back to like if you're actually blocking the pipeline, the results have to be right. You can't be sending results to the developers that have false positives and things of that nature because, again, that's a great way to get marginalized. And so the type of testing that you do in a pipeline is not the sum total of your security program because you probably have, at certain checkpoints, okay, we're going to do a more thorough static or dynamic analysis. This is when we're going to send in the manual pen testers that are going to work on this. And so I think it's important when you look at integrating into pipelines, what are your goals for that? And understand that that's not going to be the sum total of your software assurance or your application security program.
Yeah. So I think you hit on 4 points that are really interesting. Code, static analysis, traditionally. Components, software composition analysis. 2 easy points in the pipeline to check. Compute, not as easy sometimes, right? Because those scripts are getting developed and spun up on the fly. There is some interesting technology starting to come around that's starting to look at some of those configuration files to make sure things get spun up correctly. Same with cloud, right? It's all about configuration in cloud, really. I think that's where we see the biggest security gap when it comes to cloud is misconfiguration. That's what allows hackers in. I mean, Paul left his API to his Kubernetes environment open, and somebody spun up a container in that environment, right? I mean, that was a misconfiguration. It's an oversight. So where does Denim Group then, are you then helping your clients really kind of figure out that journey of all those little tie-in points? I mean, is that really where you guys are focused?
Yeah, I mean, so we provide the advisory services around that, the testing services, as well as the advisory services around. Here's how you, in your environment, given your regulatory situation, given culture of your organization, these different factors, here's how you can position yourself for success. And then obviously the testing services associated with that. And then we also have our ThreadFix platform that pulls in a lot of this data and allows for a central point where security teams can see this is the tempo of testing that we've been seeing, these are results that we've got.
Oh, good.
This is how we've communicated these to the dev teams, and allows you kind of that view across the teams across the teams around your organization, because that's typically the organizations that we're working with are have teams around the world developing software, multiple applications, multiple testing technologies. Just demographically, that tends to be the folks that we work with.
Yeah. And so you're actually helping customers bring the promise of DevSecOps to light. Let's hope.
Right. I mean, and helping, and as we talked about earlier, for a lot of the more traditional security folks, like this is,
I know,
it's scary because it's not the quarterly, it's not the annual, it's like suddenly this is continuous. But again, it's a question of how can we stay relevant? How do we maintain our seat at the table? And for the leading security folks, how do I use this transition as a way to get myself into the process.
Yeah.
How can I hack this digital transformation initiative to make sure that I'm accomplishing my goals, which are compliance and security and things of that nature.
I always tell when I always do this talk, I said I said you find out if you have a DevOps team and then go talk to them.
Right. And that's
let's start with just basic communication.
Basic communication.
Just the fact of realizing, oh yeah, I have one of those teams. Maybe I should go find out what they're doing because I better be informed to know how my security program needs to fit into what they're doing.
Right. And understanding, I come out of a software development background. And that's a lot of the stuff that we've done at Denim obviously reflects my background in software development, and so I am fortunate in a DevSecOps world in that I did a lot of software development.
Right.
That lets me talk developer.
Yeah.
A lot of security folks came out of an audit or a pen test background
or a network security background.
Exactly, and so it's not a given that they understand. Well, hey, what's an integrated development environment? Why would I want to use Kubernetes?
Right.
Like what? How do you defect trackers? Jenkins, CI/CD pipelines, and so that's in a lot of cases. There's an education component or a self-education component that security folks need, and that's a great way to do that is introduce yourself, buy somebody some lunch, ask questions, and hear the answers.
Yeah.
And that's something that that ability to understand not your enemy, but understand the people that you're trying to work with.
Right.
Given that understanding, that's going to make you a lot more effective in working with those folks, because you can
Definitely.
say, and another point that I think is really important to make. From a curmudgeon standpoint, there's a lot of focus on, those developers, they don't care about security, they're just doing whatever they want. Like, those guys. The developers that I've worked with care about security, but they also have to care about new features that got promised by an important VP to an important customer, right?
Their requirements are really business driven. They're not security driven. It's not that they don't want to build secure code. They may not have time to build secure code. So if you give them effective ways of tooling to check along the process and give them the information back, I think in a very efficient way, right? Tied back into their developer tools, right? Maybe it's a Slack or a HipChat or a Jira ticket or whatever. But if you understand that I've got a critical vulnerability, and it's coming back into a tool set that they're using as part of developing against their requirements, they're more likely to fix that thing right there because they have the data. It's really easy for them to do it. And that will result in better secure code down the pipeline instead of waiting to the end of the pipeline, which is where we traditionally are.
Right. And we've seen, just from some of the environments we've looked at, we've seen like a 44% decrease in the mean time to fix for vulnerabilities when you communicate with developers in the tools they're already using. And so that's a very powerful metaphor.
Yes.
Because too many organizations are still, hey, I did some security stuff, and here's a
here's
300-page
report.
Here you go. I put sticky notes on the stuff that I thought was really bad. Thanks. I have a special drawer, like really low in my desk that I use to file all of these reports that I get from you security guys.
Yeah, and it's aligned with a trash
Yeah,
bag.
exactly. It's actually the shredder. Thank you. You have another report? Zzz.
Right. Integration's important.
Right.
If people want to learn more about Denim Group, where should they go?
They can go to denimgroup.com. Obviously, main website. We've got a blog where we post a lot of this stuff. Folks that want to know about the ThreadFix platform, it's threadfix.it. Get it? Threadfix it.
Threadfix it.
That's clever.
Nice. Yeah.
They can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Daniel Cornell, and you talk about these things on Twitter. And reach out on Twitter, reach out via the web. We're always happy to talk about this stuff.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.